Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is artist Joe Staton. Joe, welcome to Comic Culture.
Well, thank you for having me.
Joe, your career goes back a number of years, and you were sort of that one of the artists in that new wave of talent that DC had in the 70s, right after Neil Adams sort of reinvented Batman. DC started to basically take a lot of the steam from Marvel, and you were one of those artists that was doing it. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got your foot in the door in comics and what it was like working during that heyday.
Actually, I had kind of been around a while before I got into DC, and part of the explosion of things. I started at Charlton Comics, which was kind of the bottom of the barrel, but which I loved. And I worked with my buddy Nick Cuddy, and we created a character called E-Man, who was kind of funny, but very lovable, an energy creature from the stars who decided to become a superhero and hang out on Earth. And I worked at Charlton quite a while, and then I was recruited to Marvel. I mean, we're talking about how I was part of things at DC, but I seem to have had like several different incarnations along the way. And after Charlton, Roy Thomas recruited me for Marvel, and I was inking the Avengers with Sal Buscema for a year or so, and then I was moved over to inking the Hulk first with Herb Trimpe, and then back with Sal Buscema. And so it was after working at Marvel, I guess, for about 3 years. Then I was recruited to DC, and we catch up to where we were talking about. I came into DC when they were trying to get things going, reinvigorating a lot of the older characters. They were bringing back the all-star characters, the Justice Society, and that was some of my earliest work at DC, which I really loved those characters from the 40s, and we got to create a character called the Huntress, Batman's daughter, a spinoff from Justice Society, and then eventually I wound up working. I had 2 runs on Green Lantern, and there was a lot of development with those characters. Especially on my second run with Steve Englehart. Steve had a lot of ideas for expanding the Green Lanterns who were in the storyline. We did a lot of new characters and had a lot of fun there.
You mentioned your run on Green Lantern. You were responsible for the I don't want to say the creation, but the recreation, I guess, of Guy Gardner from sort of a fill-in story character to a lead character, designing his iconic costume. So I was wondering, when you're working on something like that, you're working with Steve Englehart, how does that partnership work? Is it something where he's got an idea and he gives you that full script? Is it something where the two of you are maybe making a phone call and coming up with how you want things to go? Or is it something where it's maybe even a little looser than that?
It comes and goes. Steve had a lot of different ways of working. It kind of as things hit him, and as I understand it, Dick Giordano asked Steve to rework the kind of abandoned character of Guy Gardner. That Guy had been totally burned out at a run-in with Sinestro and was kind of in an assisted living. No, he's not quite assisted. He's actually more comatose for several years. He's just sitting there, and was kind of a boring character anyway. And Steve had ideas to kind of rework Guy's character, make him the bad boy of the Green Lanterns, which was something nobody'd really done before. And he explained to me what he was thinking. He didn't give me really specific directions on what the character to look like, but he told me what he thought the character more the character, what he would think like, which is kind of disturbed. So I would take out, Steve's suggestions and work up visuals to kind of match the characterization that he was coming up with. Sometimes people will tell me, Guy Gardner's costume is so ugly. And I tell them, well, of course it is. Guy designed it. So Guy was the first Green Lantern to design his own costume. Up until then, everybody had a kind of Owen issue green tunic of some sort. Guy was kind of a recreation all over.
And it's interesting that you put it that way, that the character, Guy Gardner, is designing the costume for himself. And it really makes it interesting because we're thinking of the character as an independent, or at least you are as that creator. So, when you get into the psychology of the character, and I'm imagining this is something that you're doing with any of the characters that you're working on, you have to sort of think about how they are as a person in order to create the way they would act on the page. Is that something that you're doing?
That's right. Yeah, you're not only developing costumes for them, but a lot of the way Steve and I worked, a lot depended on the body language, how the characters would move and their positions and their expressions and dealing with each other. And sometimes how I would have a character standing would give Steve an idea of the dialogue. What would the character be saying? And I said we worked several different ways. There was at least one instance when Steve gave me five pages of dialogue. And the art directions were, they should be doing something while they're saying this. So that's what I did. I think it was a sequence where they were kind of working on ring-generated monkey bars or something like that. So the characters were just kind of playing around on the page while we worked through Steve's dialogue. And sometimes he would give me sequences with fairly complete script, and most of the time it was more Marvel style outlines. But he always gave me what I needed to find the characters and keep them moving.
Another thing about your career that I find fascinating is that you're not afraid to move and work on different characters, different publishers. I believe that you have been doing some work on E-Man recently, and it seems like that's not necessarily risky, but it's something that tells the audience that there's a passion for what you're doing, and that there are characters that you want to tell the story on. So, is it something when you're working on, let's say, a property for DC or Marvel, and you have the opportunity to work on something that might be new and experimental, but not as safe? Is that something that you're looking at as a chance to explore your storytelling ability, or is it something where it's, gosh, maybe I won't because it's a little risky giving up the safer assignment?
I think I usually find out that things were too risky long after it's too late. But I'm always pretty much up for trying a different set of storytelling situations. And, when I was starting at DC, they were, I said they were bringing back the old characters like the Justice Society stuff and reworking them. At one point, there was a list of characters that was going into Showcase, which was a showcase. They would do a 3-issue miniseries or something that was part of the Showcase, and it kind of depended on who was around the office when it got to be turned for something to come around. And it's like I was just did a panel on the Doom Patrol. Paul Levitz was looking at the list. Paul Kupperberg and I were kind of around the office that day, and he says, "Here is the Doom Patrol. Would you like to do that?" One of us said, "What's that? We'd love to do it." So sometimes it's just a matter of going into what you're doing and figuring out how you can do it. So yeah, I'm kind of up for most anything.
And another thing is you are now working in syndicated newspaper strips. You're working on Dick Tracy, which is, perhaps one of the most famous of all the newspaper strips after Peanuts or Blondie. Dick Tracy's been around for seemingly forever. So How did you get into that assignment, and how is that different from the storytelling you're doing on like a regular comic book?
Well, I think Tracy is 2 years away from his 90th birthday. So he's been around a while. And Tracy and I go way back. We have a family story that I was at about age 4 or so. I was found in the kitchen floor trying to trace Dick Tracy. So I don't know, I go back a long ways trying to draw Dick Tracy. And I always liked the comic strips. I warmed up to them a lot, kind of before I had any idea of comic books. I eventually, came to the Dell Westerns and Superboy and such like that. But I always followed what was in the newspapers: Tracy, Phantom, Flash Gordon, Little Abner, Pogo. So I kind of came along at a good time for strips, and it was kind of always in the back of my mind that I should do a strip, preferably that I should be doing Dick Tracy. So it's kind of like my original ambition. I had tried out for Tracy. There would be rumors going around that they were open for somebody, or somebody was retiring or something, and never quite true. So, but I always wanted to do some Tracy, and my buddy Mike Curtis from down in Arkansas was a publisher of furry animals, of all things, and did a lot of online comic stuff. So we decided that there was also a rumor around at the time that the copyright holders wouldn't be too upset if you were doing like homages online. So we decided we were just on our own going to do like a short Tracy continuity. And Mike put up a Tracy homage site. He got some short stories in, and we did our little continuity, which happened to be right at the time that Dick Loker, who'd been doing the strip for, 30 years? A long time. Dick had been going a long time on Tracy. He actually did decide to retire. And the people at the Trib were aware of what we were doing, which turned out to be entirely illegal, and we should not have done that. But they figured they could sue us, or they could hire us, because we already had samples online, and what we were doing would give us a head start on the dailies. So somebody from the Trib called Mike Curtis, the writer, and says, "Would you guys like to take over the strip? Do you think you could you do it daily?" And Mike says, "Well, yeah." And he called me, and I said, "Well, yeah, we could do that." So we just kind of happened into being in the right place when it was time for somebody to take over Dick Tracy, which I'd always wanted to do. So kind of worked out.
Yeah. And I'm imagining that the differences are with a daily strip, you're working on 3 panels a day, as opposed to a book where you're doing 22 pages and various layouts and whatnot. So as an artist, how easy or difficult is it for you to make that transition from being able to tell an event in 3 panels rather, as opposed to a page or 2 pages to tell maybe a similar type of action?
It's quite a different thing to do, because, as you say, you're pretty much restricted to your rectangular panels. We do 3 panels a day, and a few more on Sunday. And for the comic book, especially after Neil and Steranko opened up all kinds of possibilities for breaking down pages, you can work all over the page and in pretty much all directions. So there's a lot more experimentation you can do in a book. and you're not subject to as much restriction, to as much discipline. But I think it suits me. The strip also suits me because that's where I started. Like I said, I broke into looking at storytelling in the 3 or 4 panels in a strip, and that telling a story. So I think it's probably easier for me than for somebody who didn't have that break-in time when I was really young with the strips. So I kind of, like I said, I'm up for most anything. I'll try anything on a page and most things in a strip.
And when you're working on the dailies, are you moving to the tablet, or are you doing things traditionally? I see there's looks like a drawing board behind you. So are you still working on pencil, ink on a board, or are you moving into the digital realm?
It's kind of mixed. The daily strips I pencil, and I scan those, and they go to Shelley Plager in Oregon, who inks them digitally. The Sundays, to give her a break, I will do them, but I do those on paper. I ink those traditionally, and then the scans go to her for lettering, and then they go to Shane Fisher in outside Detroit to do the coloring. So we do, and the coloring is of course digital. So we kind of do it all variations. I've not really mastered the tablets, so I'm still hanging in there.
And when you're inking by, you're doing the Sundays yourself, is that something where, well, I would imagine because it's a bit of a more long-form style, is this something that allows you to maybe finish the page a little differently than the daily strips, because you can maybe put in that detail yourself as the inker, and maybe just put your own stamp on it just a little bit more?
You can do that, and Shelley, of course, actually brings more detail to the dailies than that I put in there. She's more a finisher than an inker. On the Sundays, I can more things with atmosphere. I like to get into rain and thunder and the fog. Wherever Tracy lives, the weather is terrible, so we keep it going. That it snows most of the time there. That it's raining, but. See. Can you see this?
Oh yeah, if you hold it up a little bit more.
Okay.
Well, that is fantastic.
So this is a Sunday that I inked on board, and there's a lot of a shootout in the middle of a rainstorm, and everybody is flashing lights behind them. So we like to get into lots of atmosphere. So.
And I'm also noticing in your inks, there's a lot of texture. There's a lot of, it's not just a flat line on a page. There's a lot of, whether it's the brick, whether it's the lightning, whether it's the fold on the fabric. So as the inker, are you just kind of leaving that space empty, or are you kind of going back maybe and scraping some of it off with a razor blade? How are you getting those different effects and that texture onto the board?
Yeah, I will use like the time-honored tricks. I don't think in this strip we were just looking at, but sometimes take the side of a razor blade and scratch lines into the black for more rain, and of course. When it's snowing, I have a little blow device to blow white ink or spatter to simulate snow. Sometimes I'll do that when the space coupe goes into space. We'll spatter stars around. So just sometimes just thumping more, more. White spots around. So there's all the tricks been around actually before comics, because sometimes I go back to the pulp magazine. So love to do like coquille board and things back from back then. So yeah, we will get kind of not only pre-computer techniques, but kind of well, pre-modern, whatever works.
And it seems like you're working for a syndicate. They are sending this strip out to newspapers all across the country. And I'm just wondering if you've worked on a storyline or maybe a daily strip or a Sunday strip that they've said, hey, hold on a second, we need to make a change for whatever reason. And if so, how do you handle that editorial advice, let's call it?
You handle it by doing it. They own the strip. So we do what is required. But generally, they let us do pretty much what we want. But they will keep an eye out. If we have a storyline that's coming up that they know to be careful with, they will warn us. One of the things is, well, like Little Orphan Annie was being kidnapped all the time. And Junior Tracy was tracking down criminals and put in horrible danger fairly often. But we've been warned. That's not acceptable. No children in danger. We have children in the story, and Tracy will tell them what's going on, but they really cannot be taken off and threatened, which is probably we've gotten accustomed to that. But we were able to get Annie out of trouble, because when the Little Orphan Annie strip was canceled, she had actually just been kidnapped by Guatemalan pirates. That was the end of the strip. So Mike Curtis thought Annie should not be left in the hands of the pirates. So we developed a continuity in which Tracy actually tracked down the pirates, and Punjab disposed of them, and they saved Annie, and all was fine. And so now there's not a Little Orphan Annie strip, but Annie and the characters from that strip are now supporting characters in the Dick Tracy strip. They will turn up occasionally and team up with Tracy, and they keep on going.
Now, we have about a minute or so left before we have to wrap up our conversation. The one thing about Dick Tracy that I do remember is Sunday strips did have that Crime Stoppers tip, and there was also a lot of technology that has become commonplace now, like the two-way wrist radio. So I'm wondering, when you're putting the strip together, do you still use that technology, and are you still getting those great tips from law enforcement to alert people of potential dangers?
Yes, we have our police consultants, and actually I've been getting calls lately that the Social Security Administration is going to cancel my number, and I have to call in. So the funny thing with things like that is we have Crime Stopper textbooks in the Tracy strip, and I get calls that we've actually covered in the things you do to avoid being taken by scammers. Well, our police consultants have put those in the strip, so we know all about it. So we are ready for it. Tracy still has his watch, but it has the retro design, so which is just now available. So you have to keep an eye out for it.
Well, Joe, I've been told that we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today. I'd like to thank you at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon.
This industry can spoil you. So I kept having all these people tell me how good I was, and it was fun, and it was great. But I will tell you, Mike Carlin was an editor on the Superman books for years and years and years. Mike gave me the best backhand compliment that kept me in line that I've ever had. I saw him in the offices at DC once after the first miniseries had come out, and Mike just yelled down the hall. He said, "Hey, Lyle." And I went, "Yeah." And he said, "Robin looks pretty good. I didn't think you had it in you. Congratulations." And then he said, "I probably should have hired you for the Atom book." And I went, "Yes, you should have."
Comic Culture is a production of the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.